You've seen her, right? Fierce Viking shield maiden. She's all over pop culture, a warrior fighting right on the front lines. But for the longest time, everyone just kind of thought she was a myth, a cool character from the epic sagas. Well, today, we're diving into an incredible archaeological discovery that completely flipped that idea on its head. So you get this amazing description from way back in the 12th century. It's painting this picture of Lagertha, a legendary shield maiden, and she sounds totally larger than life. And yeah, the sagas are full of these epic tales, but let's be real, they're not exactly history textbooks. They're more like the stories the Vikings told about themselves, a mix of myth and memory. And that, right there, is the million-dollar question. For centuries, pretty much all historians and archaeologists thought, yeah, probably, the sagas were just stories, not proof. To get to the truth, you can't just rely on stories. Nope, you need cold, hard, physical evidence. And for that, we have to go to a very mysterious grave in Sweden. Okay, so this is where our story really kicks off. We're talking about a grave so perfectly kitted out for a warrior, it was basically the textbook example of a Viking hero. It was actually found over 140 years ago, and for almost all of that time, it was holding on to a secret that was going to rewrite a huge piece of Viking history. Picture this, it's 1878. A team of archaeologists is digging on the island of Birka in Sweden. Now, Birka wasn't just some random village. This place was a massive deal in the Viking Age, a bustling trade hub with connections stretching all the way from the North Atlantic to the Middle East. And it's right here that they stumble upon a grave they label BJ581. And what they found inside? Well, it was absolutely stunning. This is the original drawing from the dig. You can see a single skeleton, seated upright, and it's surrounded by this incredible arsenal of weapons. And down at its feet, the bones of two horses, a mare and a stallion. The grave itself was in a prime spot, high up, right outside a fortress, looking over the whole town. Every single thing about it just screamed high-status warrior. And let's just take a second to really look at this arsenal. A sword, an axe, 2 lances, 2 shields, and 25 armor-piercing arrows. This is not just symbolic stuff. This is the complete loadout for a professional fighter, someone ready for combat on horseback and on foot. I mean, this was one of the most decked-out warrior graves ever found, period. And we're not just talking about old drawings here. These are the actual artifacts, preserved for over 1,000 years. You can see the sword, the axe head, the spear points. It's real, tangible proof. It all seemed to confirm it. This was the final resting place of a powerful, respected Viking warrior. And for more than 100 years, nobody had any reason to question that. But it wasn't just about the weapons. Get this. A full set of gaming pieces was found placed right in the person's lap. Now, complete sets like this are super rare in Viking graves, and they almost always show up with military leaders. The thinking is that they use them to plan strategy and tactics. So this person wasn't just some soldier, they were likely a commander, a strategist. So, for almost a century and a half, the evidence seemed totally clear, and the conclusion was a done deal. Grave BJ581 held the remains of a powerful male Viking war leader. It was in all the books, displayed in museums. It literally became the textbook example of a Viking warrior burial. But the story was not over. And then science happened. Fast forward to the 2010s, and all these new scientific techniques are letting researchers look at old discoveries in a totally new light. So the team studying the Birka graves decided, hey, let's use these modern methods on the skeleton from BJ581. Now, there had been a whisper, a hint, back in the 1970s. An osteologist, someone who studies bones, suggested the skeleton might be female. But the idea was pretty much dismissed because, well, look at all the weapons. A warrior had to be male, right? That was the assumption. But in 2017, a team of researchers ran a DNA test on a tooth and a bone from the skeleton. And this was the result. The science was absolutely unambiguous. The DNA analysis proved the skeleton had 2 X chromosomes. The great Viking warrior, the military commander buried with full honors in grave B581, was a woman. So you can imagine, when this research was published in 2017, it just set off a firestorm. The news went everywhere, but it was met with a mix of total excitement and some really intense skepticism. The evidence seemed to finally confirm the existence of the shieldmaidens, but for a lot of people, it was just impossible to accept. And this really gets to the core of the whole debate, doesn't it? For 140 years, nobody questioned that this was a warrior's grave. The interpretation was based on the weapons, the horses, the gaming set, the location, all of it. But the second the occupant was identified as female, suddenly the entire interpretation was up for debate. It's pretty wild when you look at the shift side by side. When the skeleton was assumed to be male, the conclusion was simple: a great warrior, a commander. After the DNA results, all these new theories started popping up. Oh, maybe the weapons were just symbolic. Maybe she was buried in her husband's grave instead. All of a sudden, the most direct interpretation that she was the warrior was treated by critics as the least likely option, even though not a single piece of evidence in the grave had changed. To really get a handle on the Birka warrior, we've got to zoom out a little bit and look at the context. Was a powerful woman really that strange in the 10th century? Well, the historical record suggests not at all. In fact, she lived during a time of some incredibly influential female leaders all across the Viking world. So let's just look at the timeline, right? The Birka warrior died around the mid-900s. And during that same period, you have figures like Queen Thyra in Denmark, who was basically a nation builder, Gunnhild in Norway, a seriously feared political player, and then not long after, Emma of Normandy, who would become queen of both England and Denmark. Power was definitely not a male-only game. Let's just zero in on Queen Thyra for a second, because her story is amazing. She was so respected that she was honored on the gelling stones, which are basically called the birth certificate of Denmark. And here's the crucial part. Historical chronicles say she oversaw the strengthening of the Birka, a massive system of defensive walls. So right there, you have a clear historical example of a high-status woman directly involved in military strategy and national defense. So where does all this leave us? When you put all the pieces together, the grave, the science, the historical context, a new, much clearer picture of the past starts to form. And it's one that moves way beyond the old assumptions. And this powerful illustration is what it all leads to. It's a reconstruction based on every piece of available evidence. It really brings the science and the archaeology to life. And it shows us not a myth, but a person, a woman dressed for war, a professional warrior, and a leader of high rank. You know, there's a principle called Occam's razor, the idea that the simplest explanation is usually the right one. And if we apply that here, the conclusion is pretty straightforward. The person in grave BJ 581 was a woman who lived her life as a professional warrior, held a position of command, and was buried with all the respect and honor that her role deserved. The shield maiden, it seems, wasn't just a story after all. And that leaves us with one last, really fascinating question to think about. See, the story of the Birka warrior isn't just about one grave. It's this powerful reminder of how our own ideas, our own biases, can color how we see the past. It really makes you wonder, what other truths are just sitting there, waiting to be discovered, hidden in plain sight, just because they don't fit the stories we've always told ourselves?